There is a particular kind of silence that settles over land when no one has walked it in years. Not the silence of peace, the silence of waiting. The grass grows tall and then lies flat and then grows tall again, and the trees press in from the edges. And whatever was built there begins to lean, and the county stops maintaining the road, and the whole place starts to disappear the way a word disappears when you repeat it too many times. That is what happened to the hollow off County Road 9. And it was still happening the morning Ruth Calloway got the letter. She was 67 years old. Her husband Earl had been dead for 14 months. The savings account held enough for perhaps 2 more years of careful living, and the house needed a new water heater, and the loneliness of the thing was not something she talked about with anyone. She had learned to carry it the way you carry something heavy over a long distance. Not easily, not without pain, but without making a sound. Then the certified letter came, and it said her name, and it said the words, sole heir, and it named a piece of land she had never once heard Earl mention in 31 years of marriage. What she found at the end of that dirt track was not what she expected. It was not what anyone would have expected. There was a structure half sunk at one corner, and there was a field that had forgotten it was ever cleared. And there at the tree line, long and dark and sitting on 4 flat tires, was a 1961 Meteor Futura Hearse with the surface rust blooming across the roof like a slow orange tide. Earl's name was still on the registration in the glove box, his handwriting, the same as always, small and careful, the letters not quite touching. A hearse carries the dead from the last place they were living toward wherever they go next. That is its one purpose, its whole design. A long compartment, a smooth floor, a mechanical lift in the rear to receive what the living can no longer carry themselves. But sometimes the things left behind outlast both the grief and the memory of the grief. Sometimes a man packs something into that long, dark compartment and drives it out to a piece of forgotten land and locks it away and tells no one, not even the woman he has loved for 3 decades, because he is waiting for the right moment, and then the years run out before the moment arrives. Ruth Calloway was not a woman who expected rescue. She had never been. What she found in that hollow off County Road 9 was not rescue exactly. It was something older and quieter and more difficult to name. The long shape of a life lived in secret generosity, pressed into ledger pages and sealed envelopes, and the careful oiling of tools that no one was supposed to find for years. This is the story of what she opened when she finally worked that rusted coffin lift lever free. This is the story of what Earl left behind, and why, and what it cost him to keep quiet, and what it gave her to finally understand. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Ruth Calloway was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, looking at the same electric bill she had looked at 3 times already. And the mail slot clicked and a small stack of envelopes fell to the floor of the front hallway. She did not get up right away. She had learned in the 14 months since Earl died that there was rarely anything in the mail worth hurrying for. She was 67 years old. She had worked as a school secretary at Hester Fork Elementary for 22 years, retiring at 64 on a pension that covered the property taxes and the groceries if she was careful, and not much else. The savings account at First Community held $11,400. The water heater in the basement was 8 years past the manufacturer's recommended lifespan and made a sound like a stone dropping into a well each time it cycled on. She had written the number for a plumber on a notepad and then not called him. Some repairs you could delay. You got good at knowing which ones. Earl had been a quiet man, not cold, never cold, but contained, the way a good thermos is contained, warm on the inside, sealed at the top. He had worked for 30 years as a field technician for a mortuary supply company out of Morganfield, repairing the mechanical equipment in funeral homes across 4 counties, embalming tables, lowering devices, the hydraulic lifts on old transfer coaches. He drove a company truck and came home smelling of mineral spirits and rubber gaskets, and sometimes, faintly, of something else that they never discussed. He was good with his hands. He was not good with explanations. They had been married 31 years. Ruth knew the way he took his coffee, the specific hinge of his silence when something was bothering him, the sound of his boots on the back steps at dusk. She knew he kept a folded ADAA map in the glove box of his truck, even after the truck had a built-in navigation system he didn't trust. She knew he sent $20 in a card every Christmas to a list of names she had never seen in full. What she had not known, what she was only beginning to understand, standing in the hallway in her house slippers with an envelope from the Kessler County Surveyor's office in her hand, was that he had kept a piece of land for as long as she had known him, and he had never said a word about it. The letter was 3 pages. The first page was county bureaucracy, dense paragraphs about parcel numbers and deed transfers and the process by which unclaimed property was flagged for review. She read through it twice before the shape of it became clear. The second page was a legal summary. The land, 14.3 acres on County Road 9, outside the township of Grover Siding, had been held in Earl Delbert Calloway's name since 1978. He had paid the property taxes on it every single year. When he died intestate, without a will, the parcel passed to his surviving spouse under state law. That was Ruth. She was, as of the date of the letter, the sole heir and title holder of record. The third page was a single paragraph from the surveyor himself, a man named T. Briggs, written in the kind of plain language county employees sometimes use when they think someone might not understand the official version. It said that the property contained one small outbuilding of cinder block construction in deteriorated condition, and one vehicle, a 1961 Meteor Futura, registered to E.D. Calloway, which had been on the property for an undetermined number of years and would need to be addressed either through removal or formal registration as a stored vehicle within 90 days to avoid a county abatement order. Ruth stood in the hallway for a long time. The coffee on the table was entirely cold now. Outside, the neighbor's dog was doing what it did every morning, working itself into a complaint about something invisible at the fence line. She folded the letter along its original creases and set it on the kitchen counter beside the plumber's number she had not called. Then she went to the window and stood there with her arms crossed and looked at the yard. Earl had mentioned the hollow once. She was almost certain of it now. Sometime in the early years, the 3rd or 4th winter when they were still learning the particular geography of living together. He had said something about land his father had left him, out toward Grover Siding. She had asked a question. He had given an answer she couldn't now reconstruct. And then the subject had closed the way subjects sometimes closed with Earl. Not with a door slam, but with a gentle sideways movement, the way a river goes around a stone rather than over it. She tried, standing at the window, to feel angry about it. The land. The silence. 31 years of a Tuesday afternoon phone call he sometimes took on the back porch. The folded map. The Christmas cards. She tried to arrange these things into a picture that would justify anger, and she could not quite do it. What she felt instead was something she had no clean word for. A specific weight behind the sternum, part grief and part something almost like curiosity. The way you feel when you discover a door in a house you thought you knew completely. She called her daughter in Columbus that evening. She read the letter aloud over the phone. Her daughter said she should talk to a lawyer before doing anything. Her daughter also said Earl had always been a strange duck, and she said it with the fondness of someone who had genuinely liked the strange duck in question. Ruth said she would think about the lawyer. She did not say what she was already thinking, which was that she knew where Grover Siding was, and she knew how to read a county road number, and she had a half tank of gas in the Buick. and she was not going to wait 90 days or any other number of days to see what was on that land. She went the next afternoon. She left at 1:30 when the light was still good. She took the letter, a pair of work gloves she found in Earl's side of the garage, and the small can of WD-40 she kept under the kitchen sink for the stiff hinges on the storm door. She did not tell anyone she was going. She did not take her phone from her pocket to check it. She drove south out of Hester Fork on the state route until the state route became county road, and the county road became gravel, and the gravel became something that was only barely a road at all. The world got quieter the further she went. The trees pressed closer. And then, at the end of a 2-track lane grown over with broom sedge and volunteer sumac, she saw it, the land, the leaning outbuilding, and at the far tree line, long and dark and sitting on 4 flat tires, the unmistakable silhouette of the old Meteor hearse. She put the Buick in park. She sat with the engine running for a moment, then she got out. Earl Delbert Calloway had been born in 1947 in a house that no longer stood, on a farm that had been sold in pieces over the decades until nothing remained of it but a name on an old deed and a row of cedar trees along what used to be the fence line off Route 41. He was the second of 3 boys. His father, Lester, had worked the farm and done occasional work for the county road crew, and near the end of his life, had acquired the parcel on County Road 9 under circumstances that Earl had mentioned exactly once and never explained in full. Ruth knew this much. She had assembled it over the years the way you assemble a picture from the pieces a quiet man lets fall. Slowly, without seeming to try. He had a brother named Clifton who lived in Pikeville, and a brother named Dale who had died young, in his 30s, from something cardiac and sudden. Earl did not speak of Dale often. When he did, it was with a brevity so complete it almost sounded like a foreign language. A single sentence, sometimes 2, and then a change of subject so smooth you almost missed it. Ruth had learned not to press. Pressing with Earl was like pressing on a door that opened inward. The door did not move. You just tired yourself out. He had gone to work for the mortuary supply company at 23. After 2 years doing general mechanical work at a garage in Morganfield. The job suited him in ways he never articulated but that Ruth had come to understand as fundamental to his character. He worked alone mostly. He drove from county to county on his own schedule, showed up at the back entrance of funeral homes rather than the front, fixed the things that broke in rooms that most people never saw, and left without ceremony. The work was precise. It required patience and a specific tolerance for the particular atmosphere of those places. The refrigerated air, the smell of embalming chemicals, the absolute quiet of rooms designed to receive the dead. Earl moved through all of it without visible effect. Ruth had always thought that said something about him, though she could never decide exactly what. He was not a distant husband. That was the thing she always came back to when she tried to describe him to people. To her daughter, to the women at the church auxiliary, to herself, in the long evenings after he was gone. He was attentive in the particular ways that mattered. He noticed when she was tired before she said anything. He brought her coffee in the mornings without being asked, the same way every time. 1 spoon of sugar, a splash of the canned evaporated milk she preferred over fresh. When she was sick, he sat in the chair beside the bed and read aloud from whatever book was on the nightstand, even if it was something he had no interest in, and he read in a steady, unhurried voice until she fell asleep. These were not the gestures of a man who was not paying attention, but there were the silences. Not uncomfortable silences, not the silences of anger or withdrawal, but the silences of a man who had decided, at some point early in his life, that certain things were his to carry and nobody else's. She had seen him take the phone out to the back porch on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 or 5 times a year, and speak quietly to someone for 10 or 15 minutes, and come back in and set the phone on the counter and say nothing. She had never asked. She was not certain even now whether she had not asked out of respect for his privacy or out of a dim awareness that she might not want to know the answer, and she was not sure there was a meaningful difference between those two things. The folded map in the glove box was a county map, she remembered now. Not a state map, not a road atlas. Kessler County specifically, printed by the county planning office, the kind you could get for free at the courthouse or the Chamber of Commerce. It had been folded and refolded so many times the creases had gone soft, and one of the fold lines had worn almost through. She had seen it dozens of times over the years, reaching into the glove box for registration paperwork or a pen. She had never unfolded it. It had not occurred to her to unfold it. It was just Earl's map, one of the small fixed features of the landscape of their shared life. Like the jar of bag balm he kept on his side of the bathroom sink, or the specific brand of plain white socks he had ordered from the same catalog for 20 years. The Christmas cards were the thing she thought about most, driving south on the county road the day after the letter arrived. She had seen the envelopes. She was the one who bought the stamps, who stacked the outgoing mail by the door each December. But she had never seen the list. It was a handwritten page he kept in the top drawer of his desk, in the small room off the hallway he used as an office. She had been in that room 1,000 times. She had never opened that drawer while he was alive. She had opened it after once and found the page, and seen perhaps 30 names in Earl's small, careful handwriting, some with amounts penciled beside them, none of the amounts more than $30 or $40. She had not recognized more than 3 or 4 of the names. She had refolded the page and put it back and closed the drawer, and not thought about it clearly until now. There had been one conversation. She was almost certain of it now, turning it over as the road surface changed from asphalt to gravel under the Buick's tires. The third winter of their marriage, possibly the fourth, a Sunday. Snow on the ground, the two of them at the kitchen table after dinner with the radio on low. He had said something about his father's land. She had asked where it was, and he had set out toward Grover Siding, in the hollow below the ridge. And she had asked if it was worth anything, and he had said he didn't know and wasn't sure it mattered. And then the radio program had shifted to something else, and they had talked about that instead. And that was the last time the hollow on County Road 9 was mentioned in 30 years of marriage. She had not thought him deceptive. She did not think him deceptive now, picking her way along the rutted 2-track lane with the sumac brushing both sides of the Buick. Deception required intent to mislead, and she did not believe that was what this had been. What she believed. What she was beginning to believe, at least, the shape of it forming slowly the way shapes form in low light, was that Earl had been carrying something out here, tending to something, waiting for a moment that had a specific right feeling to it before he brought her into it. And then he had died on a Tuesday in March from a pulmonary embolism that gave him no warning and asked his permission for nothing. The moment he had been waiting for had simply not arrived in time. That was the thing about Earl. He had always been patient. The world had not always been patient back. She left Hester Fork at 1:30 on a Thursday in October, the kind of October day that cannot decide what season it wants to be. Warm in the sun, cold in the shade, the light coming in low and sideways through the windshield at an angle that made her squint. She had the county letter on the passenger seat folded to the page with the parcel number and the road designation. She had Earl's work gloves, brown cowhide with a worn patch on the right index finger, on top of the letter. She had the can of WD-40 from under the sink, a flathead screwdriver she had taken from the junk drawer, and a bottle of water. She had not brought lunch. She had not thought about lunch. The state route south out of Hester Fork was familiar for the first 12 miles. The grain elevator at the edge of town, the Pentecostal church with the hand-painted sign, The long, flat stretch past the Deaver farm, where Earl had once stopped to help a man change a tire in the rain without saying a word to Ruth about it until they were nearly home. The road was 2 lanes, recently chip-sealed, with the yellow center line still bright. She drove the speed limit. She was in no hurry, or she told herself she was in no hurry, which was not exactly the same thing. At the junction with County Road 9, she turned east. The pavement continued for perhaps 2 miles, then went to chip seal, then to plain asphalt with the edges crumbling and the center line faded to a suggestion. The fields on either side were cut corn, the stalks mowed to 8-inch stubs, and beyond the fields the tree lines were going color: red sumac, yellow hickory, the occasional orange of a young maple catching the afternoon light. It was the kind of landscape you could look at for a long time. Ruth was not looking at it. She was watching the road numbers on the small green markers posted at the intersections, checking them against the parcel description on the letter. The asphalt ended without ceremony. One moment she was on road surface, the next she was on gravel, the tires popping and shifting under the Buick, the suspension taking the corrugations in the washboard sections with a steady rhythmic shudder. The gravel was not well maintained. There were sections where the stone had migrated to the edges and the roadbed had worn down to exposed clay, pale and hard as old porcelain in the dry October weather. She reduced her speed. The world was getting quieter, the fields giving way to scrub and second-growth timber, the open sky narrowing as the tree canopy moved in from both sides. She crossed a low-water bridge over a creek she had no name for, concrete deck, no guardrails, the kind of crossing that would be impassable in a wet spring. And on the other side the gravel thinned to scattered stone, and then to nothing, and she was on dirt. The lane was 2 tracks with a grass center strip, the tracks themselves cut by years of occasional use into shallow ruts that guided the tires, whether she steered deliberately or not. Branches touched the Buick's roof on one side. A spider web, anchored between a fence post and a wild rose cane, caught the light and then was gone as the car passed through it. She bottomed out once. A section of the lane dipped into a shallow depression, a seasonal drainage, dried to bare soil now. And the Buick's undercarriage scraped hard on the far lip, a sound like a flat stone drawn across concrete. She stopped, sat a moment, put the car in reverse and rocked it back, then crept forward through the dip at an angle, the right front tire riding up onto the grass center strip, and cleared it. She exhaled through her nose. She did not say anything. She drove on. The lane curved right through a stand of second-growth locust, the trunks close set and straight as fence posts. And then it curved left and opened out, and she could see the property. It was perhaps 2 acres of open ground before the tree line, the grass tall and lain over in the places where deer had bedded, with a line of wild persimmon along the north edge and a tangle of multiflora rose consuming what had once been a fence along the south. In the center of the open ground, set back from the lane perhaps 30 yards, was the outbuilding, cinder block, perhaps 20 feet by 30, the roof a shallow pitch of corrugated tin that had gone to a mottled orange-brown, the single window opening on the south wall covered with a sheet of plywood that had delaminated at the corners and curled away from the frame. The building had settled. The northeast corner had dropped, perhaps 3 inches, perhaps 4, enough to open a hairline crack in the blockwork that ran from the roof line to within 2 feet of the grade. The steel door was still plumb in its frame, the padlock, a heavy brass master lock, not a cheap one, still seated in the hasp. She noticed the padlock. Earl had always bought good locks. It was one of those specific details that were entirely characteristic and that she had never particularly remarked on until now, when it felt like something. But she was not looking at the building. Not yet. Her eyes had gone to the tree line, to the far edge of the open ground where the locust and oak closed in again, and to the long, dark shape that sat there in the shadow of the first row of trees. The hearse. It was longer than she had expected, or remembered from the photographs she had tried to find the night before on Earl's old laptop. Long and low, the classic lines of the early 1960s coachwork, the rear roofline raised in the distinctive landau configuration with the small oval windows set into the C-pillar. The surface rust was everywhere the chrome and paint had lifted, around the window seals, along the lower body panels, in a wide oxidized bloom across the roof. The tires were flat, the rubber cracked and compressed under the weight of the car, the sidewalls showing weathering cracks. The chrome on the grille had pitted and gone white in patches. She sat in the idling Buick and looked at it through the windshield. Then she turned the engine off. The quiet was immediate and complete, just the ticking of the cooling engine and somewhere in the locust stand, a single bird working at something in the bark. She reached for Earl's gloves and then stopped. She was looking at the Hearse's windshield. The rest of the glass was filmed with years of dust and pollen and the fine green residue of tree debris. The windshield was clean, not polished, not perfect, but visibly cleared, wiped by hand. Recently enough that the film had not yet rebuilt. Someone had been here, or Earl had been here before he got sick, before the last winter, and had stood in front of this vehicle and wiped its windshield clear, as if preparing it for a drive that never happened. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. Then she put on the gloves and got out of the car. She walked to it slowly. The ground between the lane and the tree line was uneven under the tall grass, hidden tussocks and the sunken outlines of what might once have been a drainage swale. And she picked her way carefully, testing each step before committing her weight. The October light was behind her, and threw her shadow long and thin ahead of her across the grass. When she reached the hearse, she stopped a few feet short of it and looked at it the way you look at something before you touch it, taking the measure of the thing. Up close, it was both worse and better than it appeared from the lane. The rust was surface rust, mostly, orange and brown, and here and there the deeper red of iron oxide that had been working longer. But the body panels were intact. No collision damage, no caved quarters, no shattered glass. The chrome on the rear bumper had pitted heavily, but the bumper itself was straight. The rear window, the long horizontal pane set into the upper half of the cargo door, was intact and filmed with years of grime, but whole. Whatever had happened to this vehicle, it had not been wrecked and it had not been stripped. It had simply been left, and the weather had done what weather does. She tried the rear cargo door first. It was a split design, upper glass section and lower panel, hinged on the right side, with a recessed handle that had gone stiff with rust and disuse. She worked the can of WD-40 into the latch mechanism and waited. A minute. 2. She tried the handle again and got a quarter-inch of movement and no more. She braced her left hand against the door frame and applied steady pressure with her right. Not a jerk. Not a strike. Just a slow, increasing pull the way you work a stuck drawer. And felt something release part way. A grinding metal-on-metal sound. And the door swung out 3 inches and stopped. She got the flathead screwdriver into the gap and worked it along the doorframe until she found the secondary catch, a simple spring latch that had corroded in the closed position, and levered it free. The door swung open on a groan that startled the bird out of the locust trees. The coffin lift mechanism ran along the floor of the cargo compartment on a pair of steel tracks, port and starboard, the rollers designed to allow a casket to be slid smoothly in and out at the level of the bumper. The tracks were clogged with leaf debris, dead insects, and a fine brown grit that had worked in through the door seals over the years. The lift itself, the hand-operated lever on the right side track that engaged a ratcheting powel to raise or lower the roller platform, was seized. She could see it clearly in the afternoon light coming through the open door. A steel lever perhaps 14 inches long, the rubber grip cracked and hardened, the pivot point filmed with rust. She applied the WD-40 liberally, letting it run down into the pivot and along the pawl mechanism. She waited. She was good at waiting. Earl had taught her that, or perhaps she had always known it and Earl had simply confirmed it. She tried the lever. It did not move. She applied more solvent, worked the flathead into the pawl housing to break up the surface corrosion, applied the lever again with both hands. Steady pressure, heel of the right palm driving down, left hand steadying the track, and felt the first faint suggestion of give, a microscopic shift in the metal, the way frozen ground feels just before the thaw takes it. She stopped, let it rest, tried again. The lever moved a 1/4 inch, then a half. Then with a sound like a bolt being drawn in an old lock, a clean mechanical snap. The pawl released and the lever traveled through its full arc, and the roller platform shifted on the tracks with a dry metallic shriek and then settled into its lowered position. She let out a breath. She had not realized she was holding it. She wiped her face on the back of Earl's work glove, leaving a faint rust smear on her cheekbone, and looked into the cargo compartment. It was empty of any casket, empty of any liner or padding. Those had been removed long ago, or perhaps had never been installed for this purpose. What was there instead was this: a steel document box, approximately 12 inches by 8 by 4, bolted through the floor of the compartment to the frame below, with 4 3/8-inch carriage bolts, the nuts visible and tight. The box itself, painted with a coat of truck bed liner compound that had bonded to the steel and kept the surface corrosion at bay almost entirely. Beside it, laid along the right side of the compartment between the track and the wall panel, was a canvas tool roll, the kind with individual sewn pockets, tied closed with a length of cotton webbing, and that was all. The compartment was otherwise bare. She reached for the tool roll first. It was perhaps 20 inches long and 8 inches in diameter when rolled, heavier than it looked. She untied the cotton webbing and unrolled it on the lowered platform. The pockets held 8 tools in total: a 3/8-inch socket wrench with the rubber grip worn smooth on the front face, a set of combination wrenches in standard sizes from 3/8 to 3/4, a pair of channel lock pliers, a small ball-peen hammer, a cold chisel, a center punch, and a stubby Phillips screwdriver with the blade edge still sharp. Every tool was clean. Every tool was lightly oiled. Not dripping, not lacquered, just the thin preserving film of someone who understood that metal needs tending if you expect it to work when you need it. She turned the socket wrench in her hands. The oil came off on the gloves in a faint dark smear. She understood, looking at those tools, that she was not the first person to have opened this compartment in recent memory. Earl had been here. Earl, or someone Earl trusted, had oiled these tools and set them here deliberately, as if laying out equipment for a task that someone else was going to have to finish. She pressed the wrench against her sternum for a moment, both hands around it. Then she set it down and looked at the document box. The box was locked with a simple key lock, the keyhole centered in the front face below the lid lip. She did not have the key. She had not thought about a key. She sat with that fact for a moment, perched on the edge of the lowered platform, with the afternoon going amber around her and the locust trees casting their long, thin shadows across the grass. Then she thought about Earl, about the key hook inside the kitchen cabinet above the microwave, where he kept every key he had ever owned, labeled in his small handwriting on paper tags threaded with a loop of wire. She had not cleaned that hook out. She had not been able to clean that hook out. It was still there, a full year after he was gone, exactly as he had left it. She stood up. She closed the cargo door as far as it would go. She walked back across the uneven ground to the Buick, got in, and started the engine. She had a 40-minute drive back to Hester Fork. She did not mind it. She knew exactly what she was going back for. She found the key on the 3rd try. The hook above the microwave held 41 keys on individual wire loops, each tagged in Earl's handwriting: backdoor spare, Jensen cultivator, deer stand padlock, storage unit B, and on in that same small, careful script. Some tags so old the paper had gone yellow and soft at the edges. She had stood in front of it the evening she got home from the hollow, still in her coat, reading each tag in the light from the range hood. The third key from the left on the second row was tagged with a single word. Box. The tag was not old. The paper was still white, the ink still dark. He had made it recently, or recently enough. She took it off the hook and held it in her palm, and looked at it for a long time without moving. She did not go back the next day. She went back on Saturday, which gave her 2 days to think about it and to gather what she thought she might need. At the hardware store in Hester Fork, she bought a can of rust converter, a tube of bearing grease, a new pry bar, 30 inches, the flat kind with a curved nail slot at one end, and a proper work light that ran on 4D batteries. Total came to $34.11. She paid in cash. On the way home, she stopped at the salvage yard on Route 41 and asked the man at the window if he had a set of ramps she could borrow to get under a car. He told her he didn't loan equipment. She said she understood and drove home. Saturday was clear and cold, 18 degrees warmer by noon than it had been at first light, the kind of day that rewards patience. She left at 9 in the morning, drove the same route south, and this time she knew when the gravel started and when the dirt started, and she navigated the low water bridge without hesitation and cleared the drainage depression in the lane on the first attempt. Right tire up on the grass center strip. No scraping. Small competencies accumulated fast. She parked the Buick in the same place and got out and went directly to the hearse and opened the cargo door. It swung out freely this time, the latch still freed from the week before, and tried the key in the document box. It turned. One full rotation, clean, the lock mechanism smooth as if it had been serviced recently, which perhaps it had. The lid lifted on a pair of small piano hinges set into the rear edge. Inside the box there were 3 items. A hand-drawn ledger in a brown cardboard cover, approximately 6 inches by 9, held closed with a rubber band that had gone brittle and snapped when she touched it. A folded sheet of paper in a white envelope with her name on the front in Earl's handwriting, and a smaller envelope, letter-sized, sealed, labeled in the same hand with a date and a set of instructions she read twice before she understood. She did not open anything yet. She set the lid back down, not locked, just resting, and sat on the edge of the cargo platform with her hands on her knees and looked at the tree line for a while. It was on the drive back through Grover Siding that she stopped at Tilton's. She had passed the building twice before without registering it clearly. A low cinder block structure set back from the road behind a gravel apron, a hand-painted sign above the door reading Tilton's Feed and Hardware in letters that had once been red and were now the color of dried brick. A smaller sign in the window said, "Open." She needed a replacement carriage bolt. One of the 4 securing the document box to the floor had stripped when she tested it, and she wanted it tight before she left the vehicle again. And she had seen, driving past, the silhouette of bolt bins through the window. The bell above the door was a real bell, brass, the kind on a coiled spring. The interior was narrow and long, the shelves on both sides running floor to ceiling, stocked with the specific density of a store that has been adding inventory for decades without ever removing anything that might eventually be needed. Bags of mineral supplement stacked against the left wall, bins of fasteners down the center aisle, sorted by size and type in the hand-labeled compartments of a wooden rack that was older than Ruth. At the far end, behind a wooden counter worn smooth and dark with years of use, a man was writing something in a ledger with a ballpoint pen. He was in his middle 80s, Ruth estimated, white-haired, compact, the kind of lean that comes from a lifetime of physical work rather than from any intention. He wore a canvas work shirt the color of old mustard and did not look up immediately when the bell rang. He finished what he was writing first. Then he looked up and said good morning in the straightforward way of a man who does not perform friendliness but who is, in fact, friendly. She told him what she needed: a 3/8-inch carriage bolt, coarse thread, 2.5 inches. And he came around the counter without hurrying, and went directly to the third bin from the end of the center rack, and produced the bolt and a matching nut and a flat washer from 3 different compartments, with the practiced economy of someone who has found the same items several thousand times. He set them on the counter. The price was 43 cents. While she was finding 2 quarters in her coat pocket, he asked without particular emphasis where she was working. She told him she had property out on County Road 9, the old Callaway parcel. She said it without thinking about the name first, and then she watched his face. He did not change expression, exactly. Something moved behind his eyes, a recognition, a settling, like a compass needle finding north. And he was quiet for a moment before he spoke. He said he knew that land. He said it the way you say something that is both true and insufficient, a sentence that has more behind it than it shows. He did not ask how she was connected to the property. He did not say anything further about Earl. He turned back to the counter and rang the bolt and nut and washer on a handwritten receipt pad and tore off her copy. Then he reached under the counter and set a tube of Zevert bearing grease beside the receipt, the white kind, for pivot mechanisms, the 4-ounce tube with the metal nozzle tip. He did not add it to the receipt. She looked at the tube and looked at him. He said the mechanisms on those old coaches got stiff if you didn't keep up with them. He said it without looking at her, capping his pen. She put the 43 cents on the counter. She picked up the tube of grease and held it for a moment. She asked what she owed for it. He shook his head once, not elaborately, just a single small movement, and picked up his ledger again. She asked if he had known Earl. He said he had, and returned to his writing. She stood at the counter for another moment. Then she said, "Thank you." And he said, "Come back if you need anything else." And she went out through the spring bell door into the cold October morning and stood beside the Buick for a moment before she got in, the tube of grease in one hand and the receipt in the other, looking at nothing in particular and feeling the specific weight of a kindness offered without explanation and refused to be reduced to a transaction. She went back on Monday. She had intended to go Sunday, but she did not, and she did not examine the reason closely. She spent Sunday at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that she actually drank while it was still warm, which was unusual, and she looked at the key on the counter where she had set it, and she thought about Earl and about patience, and about the specific quality of silence that fills a house when the person who used to move through it is gone. She went to bed at 9 and lay awake for an hour and a half looking at the ceiling. Monday morning, she was up before the light and on the road by 8. The hollow was quiet in the morning, in a way it had not been in the afternoon. The grass was rimed with frost, white along the blades and gone to silver where the low sun caught it at an angle. Her breath showed in front of her face as she crossed from the Buick to the hearse, and her footprints through the frosted grass were dark green behind her. She opened the cargo door and unlocked the document box and took out all 3 items and laid them on the lowered roller platform in the order she intended to address them. The ledger first, then the main envelope, the smaller sealed envelope last, the one with the date and the instructions, which she had read twice on Saturday, and which she intended to follow exactly. The ledger was hand-ruled in pencil on plain paper, bound in a brown cardboard cover with a piece of cloth tape along the spine. The rubber band that had held it disintegrated when she first touched it on Saturday, and now the cover fell open freely. The first entry was dated June of 1981. The last was dated February of the year Earl died. 41 years of entries in that same small, careful handwriting, 2 or 3 entries to a page, each one the same format. A date, a first name and last initial, a dollar amount, and a brief notation in 2 or 3 words. June 12, 81. Dwayne H. $34. Fuel pump, F-150. September 4, 83. Marlene C. $9. School shoes, 2 pair. March 20, 87. Gerald and Patsy. Duck-you. $211. Furnace part. Installation. She turned pages slowly. The amounts were never large. The biggest single entry she found in the first pass was $260, recorded in the winter of 2003 beside a notation that read simply, heating oil, 350 gallons. Most entries were under $50. Some were as small as $6 or $8, and the notations beside those smallest amounts were sometimes the ones that stopped her longest. A notation that read, bus fare, Columbus beside a $9 entry in the autumn of 1996. One that read, spelling bee, registration beside a $12 entry in the spring of 2001. None of the entries had a column for repayment. There was no repayment column. There never had been. She counted the pages. There were 62 of them, front and back, dense with entries. She did not count the individual entries because she could not have said what number would have satisfied her. It was enough to hold the ledger in both hands and understand the weight of it. Not the physical weight, which was negligible, but the weight of 41 years of small, consistent, unnamed generosity recorded in pencil, in a mortuary supply repairman's handwriting, and then locked in a steel box in the back of a 1961 hearse on 14 acres of overgrown land that nobody knew he owned. She closed the cover. She set it down carefully, the way you set down something that belongs to a category of objects you did not previously know existed. She picked up the white envelope. Her name was on the front. Ruth, in Earl's hand, without the last name, the way he had written her name on birthday cards and on the notes he sometimes left on the counter when he had to leave early. She did not open it immediately. She turned it over. The flap was sealed with the kind of pressure-sensitive adhesive strip that came on better quality stationery envelopes, the kind Earl would have had to order specifically. She worked a thumbnail under the edge and opened it cleanly without tearing. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds, covered front and back in the same handwriting, dated March the 3rd, 11 years before he died. Ruth, I have been starting this letter for about 3 years, and this is the version I am finally going to put in the box, so here it is. The land on County Road 9 belonged to my father, and before that to his father, who cleared part of it and gave up on the rest, and left it to grow back to what it wanted to be. I have been paying the taxes on it since Daddy died in '77, and I have been out there more times than I could count, mostly on the Tuesday calls you probably noticed but were kind enough not to press me on. I want to explain that, and I want to explain the box and the hearse and the ledger, and I want to do it plainly. The hearse I bought from the Dempsey Funeral Home in Grover Siding in 1979 when they retired it from service. I paid $400 for it. I drove it out to the hollow because I needed somewhere dry and lockable, and I did not want to explain it, which I recognize is not a good reason but is the honest one. The ledger is what I have been keeping track of. You will see the amounts. None of them are large because the point was never the amount. The point was just to be useful when I could see a way to be useful. I did not want thanks for it, and I did not want it discussed, which is why I did not discuss it, including with you, and I am sorry for that specific part. Now the practical matter. Under the floor of the outbuilding, 3 feet from the northeast corner, beneath a cinder block that sits slightly higher than the ones around it. You will see it if you look. There is a paint can, sealed with a rubber mallet. It is a 1-gallon Sherwin-Williams can, the yellow label, the lid struck down all around. Open it with the flat end of the pry bar. What is inside is for you. I have been setting it aside for a long time with the intention of telling you about it when I had the hollow in a condition worth showing you, and then the years went the way years go and the condition never felt ready, and I kept putting off the conversation. That was wrong of me. I should have told you about all of it long before now. I was waiting for the right moment, and I know that is not a good enough explanation, but it is the true one. Use what is in the can however you see fit. It is yours. It has always been yours. The land I would ask you to think about before you sell it, but that is only a request and not a condition. Do with it what makes sense for you. I trust your judgment on that, as I have trusted your judgment on everything else that mattered. I love you plainly and without condition, which I hope I showed you well enough over the years that this letter is not the first time you are hearing it. Earl D. Calloway, March 3rd. She read it through once. Then she folded it back along its creases and held it against her chest with both hands, and looked out through the open cargo door at the frosted grass and the persimmon trees and the pale October sky beyond them. She sat that way for a long time. She did not wipe her face. She did not make a sound. She just sat with the letter pressed to her sternum, and the cold coming in through the open door, and the hollow quiet around her on all sides. She had been working the property for 3 days before Dennis Pruitt arrived. 3 days of driving out in the morning and coming home in the late afternoon with dirt under her fingernails and rust stains on the knees of her jeans. 3 days of clearing the multiflora rows along the south fence line with a pair of loppers and hauling the cut canes to a pile at the edge of the tree line. 3 days of sweeping out the outbuilding's interior with a push broom and bagging the debris. Dead leaves, mouse castings, a desiccated bird that had gotten in through a gap in the roof tin and not gotten out again. She had not yet opened the sealed envelope or located the paint can. She was not ready for that yet. She was still getting acquainted with the land itself, which was different from reading about it in a county letter, and different again from looking at it through a car windshield. You did not know a piece of ground until you had walked its edges. Pruitt arrived on a Thursday, mid-morning. She heard the truck before she saw it. A newer half-ton, dark blue, moving down the 2-track lane at a careful speed that suggested a man who did not want to bottom out his undercarriage, and who had also perhaps driven unfamiliar dirt lanes before. He pulled up behind the Buick and sat in the truck for a moment before he got out, the way people sometimes do when they are composing themselves. Then the door opened and he stepped out, and he was carrying a clipboard with a manila folder clipped to it, and he was dressed in clean work pants and a collared shirt under an unzipped fleece vest, and his boots were the kind that were meant to look like work boots without having been used as work boots very much. He was perhaps 55. He had the unhurried, even-tempered look of a man who was comfortable with pauses. He introduced himself by first and last name, and shook her hand with a clean, dry grip, and told her he was in land acquisition and development, and that he had been tracking the county property review notices as a matter of course, and had seen the Calloway parcel come through. He said it pleasantly, as if explaining something benign, which in its way it was. This was how his business worked. She understood that. He was not pretending to be something other than what he was. He said he hoped he wasn't interrupting anything, looking at the loppers leaning against the fence post and the pile of cut cane at the tree line. She told him he was not interrupting. He opened the manila folder on the clipboard and produced a single printed page. It was a comp sheet, comparable land sales in the county over the previous 18 months. 4 properties listed with their acreage and sale prices and a brief description of each. He walked her through it with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times, pointing to each line in turn, not rushing. The comps ranged from just under $2,000 an acre to just over $3,000, depending on road access and timber value. He said the County Road 9 parcel presented some access challenges, and the outbuilding was a liability more than an asset in its current condition, but that his company could take it as is, handle all the permitting and demolition, and that he could offer her $28,000 for the 14.3 acres. He said it directly, without softening the number or inflating it, which she found she almost respected. She did not respond immediately. She had learned over 67 years that silence made people reveal things, and she was curious what Dennis Pruitt would reveal if she did not fill the space. He let the silence sit for a count of perhaps 5 before he continued. He said he wanted to be straightforward with her because he thought that was the respectful approach. He said that the county had been conducting reviews of unpermitted structures in this particular road district, which she may have seen referenced in her notification from the surveyor's office, and that structures in violation of current setback codes could be subject to an abatement order, which would require the landowner to bring the structure into compliance or demolish it at their own expense within a specified window. He said he was not raising that to pressure her. He said it as if he were raising it entirely for informational purposes. He said she should take whatever time she needed to think it over. He held out a business card. She took the card. She looked at it. Dennis J. Pruitt, Pruitt Land Holdings, LLC, a Morganfield address, a phone number. And then she looked up at him and said she would think about it. He nodded. He said that was completely reasonable. He closed the folder on his clipboard and said he'd be easy to reach if she had any questions. And he shook her hand again and got back in the truck and turned it around on the 2-track with a careful 3-point maneuver and drove back down the lane the same unhurried way he had arrived. She stood and watched the truck until it was out of sight in the locust trees. She set the card on the dashboard of the hearse. Not in her pocket, not in her purse. On the dashboard, where it sat in the thin October light and did not mean anything in particular. She stood at the open driver's door of the hearse for a while with her hand on the roof and looked at the outbuilding, and then at the open ground, and then at the tree line where the persimmons were still holding a few shriveled fruits, and the oaks were dropping their leaves in 1s and 2s in the still air. The $28,000 was not a serious number. She did not need a lawyer to tell her that, though she intended to ask one anyway. The threat of the abatement order was real enough to look into, and probably not as serious as it had been framed. These were the calculations of a man working a standard approach, and she did not hold it against him. What she held instead was the particular clarity that came from having just been offered a clean exit and having felt, in the moment of the offer, no pull toward it whatsoever. She had not expected that. She had come out here 14 days ago not knowing what this land was or what it meant or what Earl had been doing with it for 40 years. She did not fully know those things now, but she knew the weight of the ledger in her hands, and she knew the handwriting on the envelope, and she knew the specific quality of a lock maintained so that someone else could open it without trouble. A man who oils his tools and keeps his locks clean and drives out to a piece of forgotten land for 40 years without explanation, and leaves a letter that begins, "I have been starting this letter for about 3 years." That man was not telling her to sell the ground to the first developer who came down the lane with a comp sheet and a soft warning. She called the lawyer in Morganfield the next morning. His name was Wallace Briggs. No relation, he said to the county surveyor, which was a coincidence she noted without comment. She read him the relevant sections of the county letter and described Pruitt's visit in plain terms. He asked her to bring in the deed documentation when she had it gathered and said he would look into the abatement question, which he called a standard approach and not an emergency. His retainer was $350. She wrote the check without hesitation, tore it from the book, and set it by her purse to mail. Then she went to put her coat on, because it was already 8:30 and the road to the hollow was 40 minutes and she had a cinder block floor to look at. The cinder block was exactly where Earl had said it would be. 3 feet from the northeast corner, slightly proud of the surrounding floor, its top surface sitting perhaps a 1/4 inch higher than the blocks on either side. Not enough to trip on, barely enough to notice unless you were looking for it. She had been looking for it since Monday. She had measured from the corner with a steel tape, marked the spot with a piece of blue chalk, and then stood over it for a full minute before she knelt and worked the flat end of the pry bar into the mortar joint and leaned her weight onto the handle. The block had not been mortared to the substrate. It lifted clean, dry sand sifting off its underside, and beneath it was a cavity in the compacted gravel base approximately the size and shape of a 1-gallon paint can. The can was there. Yellow label, Sherwin-Williams. The lid struck down tight all around with a rubber mallet exactly as the letter had described. She got the flat end of the pry bar under the lid rim and worked it around the circumference in small increments, not forcing, just releasing, and the lid came off with a sound like a seal breaking, and the smell of dry, cold metal rose out of the darkness. The money was banded in rubber-banded stacks of mixed bills, 50s and 20s and a few hundreds, each stack held with a strip of paper on which Earl had written the amount in pencil. She counted the stacks before she counted the total, 11 of them, lying flat in the can with a piece of wax paper between the top stack and the lid. She counted the total twice, once quickly and once slowly, moving each stack from her left hand to the right as she went. $61,400. She sat back on her heels on the cold cinder block floor and looked at the open can, and looked at the money, and looked at the open can again. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would have added anything. Wallace Briggs called her the following Tuesday with the legal summary. The title was clean, no liens, no disputed claims. The tax record unbroken from Lester Calloway's original acquisition in 1953 through Earl's 44 years of continuous payment to the present. The abatement question was, as Briggs had predicted, not an emergency. The county notice was a form letter sent to all properties flagged in the annual review, and the outbuilding, while non-conforming, was grandfathered under a provision that applied to structures predating the current code adoption. Pruitt's framing of it had been accurate in the narrowest technical sense and misleading in every practical sense. Briggs said this with the mild professional tone of a man who had seen the same approach many times and found it tiresome rather than outrageous. He said her title was sound and her position was straightforward. She thanked him, and he told her to call if Pruitt followed up. And that was that. Pruitt did not follow up. His card sat on the Hearse's dashboard through the rest of October and into November, acquiring a faint film of dust. And he did not call, and he did not come back down the lane, and after a while the card was simply part of the landscape of the vehicle, like the cracked rubber of the old steering wheel cover and the round indentation in the headliner where someone had pressed upward with a thumb decades ago. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had made a business calculation and received a clear signal that the calculation had not worked, and he moved on to the next parcel, the way businessmen do. Ruth did not think about him much after the first week. She began with the ledger names in early November. She had 31 names that were traceable, full last names or initials clear enough to cross-reference with the Grover Siding and Hester Fork directories she found at the county library. And she started making calls on a Wednesday afternoon, working through the list in the order she had copied them into a new notebook. The calls were difficult to begin and became easier as she went. Some numbers were disconnected. Some reached the children or grandchildren of people who were no longer living. Several reached the people themselves, now in their 60s and 70s, and one woman of 83 who was sharp and immediate, and who, when Ruth identified herself as Earl Calloway's wife, went quiet for a long moment and then said, "Well, I always wondered if someone would call." The shape that emerged from the calls was not surprising exactly, but it had a cumulative weight that pressed on her in a way she had not anticipated. A furnace replaced in the winter of 2002 for a family of 5 on County Road 12, whose father was between jobs. A truck engine rebuilt in the spring of 1988 for a young man who needed it to get to work at a concrete plant 30 miles away, and who had exactly $40 in his checking account and no other options. A widow on Route 41 whose heating oil bill had been covered 3 winters running in the mid-90s. She had assumed it was a church program, until now. A set of school clothes for 2 girls in 1996, delivered to their mother in a paper bag, left on the porch with no note. None of the recipients had been told where the help came from. Several had spent years trying to find out. None of them had found out until now. She told each of them the same thing in plain terms, that the help had come from Earl, that he had kept a record of it, and that she thought they deserved to know. She did not characterize it further than that. She did not editorialize. She let each person respond in whatever way they responded, some with silence, some with the kind of short declarative sentence that covers a larger emotion, one man with a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. And she wrote their responses in her notebook beside their names, not because she planned to do anything with the notes, but because it felt important to record that these were real people, whose real lives had been touched by a man who had driven a company truck through 4 counties for 30 years, repairing equipment in quiet rooms, and had not mentioned any of it to anyone. The gathering on the property happened on the 2nd Saturday of November, which was not something Ruth had planned or organized in any formal way. She had mentioned to 3 of the families that she intended to be at the Hollow that Saturday morning, and word had moved in the way that word moves in small rural communities. Not quickly, not through any single channel, but steadily, person to person, along lines of connection that had been in place for decades. By 10 in the morning, there were 11 vehicles parked along the lane and in the grass beside it, and perhaps 20 people standing in the open ground in the cold November light, some of whom knew each other and some of whom did not. Harlan Tilton was there, in his canvas workshirt, standing near the outbuilding with a cup of coffee from a thermos. He did not say much. He did not need to. Ruth stood at the open cargo door of the hearse with the ledger in her hands and let people look at it who wanted to look at it. She did not make a speech. A few people spoke. Brief, plain things, the kind of sentences that carry more than they appear to carry. And a few did not speak at all, but stood and looked at the land and the hearse and the clean-swept outbuilding and the frost-burned grass and seemed to find something adequate in simply being present. By noon, the gathering had dispersed the same quiet way it had assembled. Harlan Tilton was the last to leave. He paused at his truck and looked back at her across the open ground and gave a single nod, the kind that means something specific and does not need a caption. She nodded back. He got in and drove away up the lane, and the hollow was quiet again, and the pale November sun was still above the tree line. And Ruth stood in the open door of the outbuilding and looked out at the land that Earl had been tending for 40 years, and felt, for the first time since the certified letter arrived, that she understood the full weight of what she had been given. The water heater got replaced in December, which was later than it should have been, but earlier than it would have been without the paint can. The plumber she finally called was a man named Garrett Seuss, who had been in the ledger. $9, spring of 2004, notation reading license exam. Fee, and who, when she mentioned Earl's name while scheduling the appointment, told her on the phone that he would be there first thing Tuesday and that she should not worry about the rate. She told him she would pay the standard rate, and she did. He did good work and did not drag it out and left the basement cleaner than he found it. That was December. By January, she had the Buick's front struts replaced and a new kitchen faucet installed and $11,200 still in the savings account, which was nearly what had been there before, and she was no longer watching the electric bill with the particular fixed attention of a person counting toward a hard edge. She had hired a structural engineer from Morganfield to look at the outbuilding in late November, a woman named Carol Peavy, who drove out in a mud-spattered Subaru and walked the perimeter of the building twice before she went inside, tapping on the blockwork with a small hammer and making notes on a yellow legal pad. The verdict was better than the lean of the northeast corner suggested. The footer was intact, the blockwork was sound except for that one hairline crack, and the roof tin, while rusted and in need of replacement, was still keeping water out of the interior in all but the worst weather. Peve gave her a repair sequence: tuck point the crack, jack and reseat the dropped corner on a shimmed steel plate, replace the roof tin, reframe the window opening with treated lumber, hang a new door, She estimated the materials at roughly $4,200 if Ruth did the roof labor herself or found someone local. Ruth wrote the estimate in her notebook and circled it and put a question mark beside it, and then she thought about it for 3 days and crossed out the question mark. She did the work through February and into March, mostly on Saturdays and the occasional weekday when the weather was right. Harlan Tilton directed her to a sheet metal supplier in Grover Siding, who sold her the corrugated tin at the contractor rate without her asking, and a man named Pete Schuler, who had been at the November gathering, showed up one Saturday with a hydraulic floor jack and a 2-foot section of steel I-beam, and raised the northeast corner back to level in under an hour, refusing any payment with the same single headshake she had seen Harlan use. She mixed the tuck point mortar herself from a bag of Type S and worked it into the crack with a pointing trowel, striking the joints flush and smoothing them with a wet finger, the way she had seen a mason do it on a neighbor's chimney 20 years before. The work was not perfect. It was solid. The new ledger she started in April. It was the same format as Earl's, hand-ruled in pencil on plain paper, bound in a cardboard cover, the same 6x9 size because that was the size she had cut the paper to before she thought about it, and then recognized what her hands had known before she did. The first entry was April 14th. Pete Schuler, $0, corner repair. She marked it paid in full, which was not Earl's format, but it was hers. The second entry was Harlan Tilton, $0, materials guidance, marked the same way. She was not Earl. She was not trying to be Earl. But the ledger was a way of keeping track of what the land owed and what the land had received. And it seemed important to her that the record continue even if the handwriting was different. She opened the tool lending shed on the first Saturday of May. She had hung a new steel door, a pre-hung unit from the lumber yard in Hester Fork, 32 inches in swing, keyed alike to the brass master lock from the Hearse. And inside she had built a simple tool rack along the back wall from 2x4 framing lumber and lag-screwed it to the blockwork at 3 points. The tools from the Hearse's canvas roll were on the rack. Around them she had added items from Earl's garage at the house, a 1/2-inch impact driver, a pipe wrench, a 12-ton hydraulic bottle jack, a chain come along, a pair of pipe clamps, a wire feed welder that she did not entirely know how to use but that she had tested twice to be certain it worked. Each tool had a small paper tag tied to it with a wire loop. Each tag had Earl's handwriting on it, transferred from a catalog of his garage tools she had found in the desk drawer beside the Christmas list. She had not copied the handwriting. She had used the original tags. She put a hand-lettered sign on the door in black paint marker on a piece of 1x6 pine. Tools. Free to borrow. Sign the book. The sign-in book was a composition notebook on a shelf beside the door with a coffee can holding 3 ballpoint pens. She had written the first entry herself. Ruth Calloway, pry bar, returned. Below it, by the end of the first week, there were 7 more entries in 7 different hands. The young man arrived on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of October, almost exactly 1 year after Ruth had first driven down the 2-track lane. She was replacing the last section of fence wire along the south property line when she heard a vehicle come to a stop on County Road 9, out beyond the lane entrance, and then the sound of a door, and then silence. She waited. After a few minutes, she heard footsteps on the lane and looked up and saw him coming through the locust stand. Young, perhaps 22 or 23, in a canvas work coat that was not warm enough for the day, carrying a small duffel bag. He stopped when he saw her, a respectful distance away, and said his truck had broken down at the county road junction, a half-mile back, and he thought it was the alternator, or maybe the battery. He wasn't sure, and he had $11 in his wallet and no way to call anyone. He said he had seen the sign on the door from the road. She set down the fence stretcher and pulled off Earl's work gloves and looked at him for a moment. He had the look of someone who had been on a difficult road for longer than the distance between here and the county road junction. She recognized it. It was not a look she could have described precisely, but she knew it the way you know the smell of weather before it arrives. She told him to come on up to the shed. She took the 3/8-inch socket wrench from the rack and a set of combination wrenches and the battery terminal cleaner from the shelf above the workbench and put them in a canvas bag and handed it to him. She told him to start with the terminals before he assumed the alternator. She told him if it was the alternator, there was a parts place in Grover Siding that would have it in stock and would sometimes work out a payment arrangement if he explained the situation plainly. He asked what he owed her for the tools. She said to sign the book and bring them back when he was done. He signed the book. His name was Marcus. She did not read the last name. And he picked up the canvas bag and said thank you in the way people say it when they mean something more than the words carry. And she said you are welcome in the way that closes a thing properly. And he went back down the lane through the locust trees and was gone. The afternoon came down slow and golden through the oak canopy. Ruth stood in the open door of the shed for a while with her arms crossed and looked at the hearse sitting under its patched tin roof with the new tires on its axles and the coffin lift lever moving free and easy on its greased pivot. The windshield was clean. She had kept it clean all year. The hollow was still around her, the persimmons and the frost-burned grass and the pale October sky going amber at the edges where the sun was beginning its descent. And the land was quiet in the way that land is quiet when it has been attended to and knows it. Earl had given her something out here. Not the money, or not only the money. He had given her the use of a life she had not known he was living, and he had trusted her to know what to do with it, and she had. Some debts you do not repay, you pass them on. That is the only accounting that makes sense of them.